Hello, Sunshine. I'm Alexi LALAS, and welcome to the State of the Union podcast, where we look at the beautiful game on and off the field through the lens of red, white, and blue-colored glasses. This week, we'll be talking about the Champions League final. It is done and dusted, but so much to talk about. We'll be talking about World Cup qualifying for the U.S. men's national team, a little more information about that. We'll be talking about NWSL and the potential exodus of players. We'll be talking about El Trafico, El Trafico come and gone. We'll be talking about Ted Lasso and so much more. But first, joining me, as always, my friend, my colleague, my guiding light, David Mosse, a soccer savant and a Fox Soccer researcher and writer extraordinaire. Mosse, how are you on this Monday, August 24th in the year 2020?
I am doing well after a busy weekend of covering MLS.
Yes, we were back in the saddle. MLS is back again, whatever we're calling it here. Obviously, the bubble down there in Orlando is done. We're back with games coming basically every single day, and certainly from a Fox perspective, we're televising them on Big Fox. We had the El Trafico on Big Fox on Saturday, and then we had wasn't the Cascadia Cup, but it still was Seattle-Portland on Sunday. So it's good to be back at work. It's good to be back in the studio to see you and so many people in front and behind the camera that do that work. What else did you do, Mosse, this week? Did you tune into anything interesting when it comes to your viewing habits?
Big update on the television front.
Okay.
I am off and running on Deadwood.
Okay, you have been talking about this for a while, right? You were talking about this for a while, but now you finally have broken the seal.
Yeah, Deadwood, for people who don't know, it's a show that aired on HBO in the mid-2000s that was, at the time, considered part of the HBO Holy Trinity along with The Sopranos and The Wire. It's slipped from the consciousness somewhat in recent years, but it's always been a big hole in my television watching resume that I wanted to rectify at some point, so I've decided to do it now. I started this past week. I'm already in the middle of season 2, cranking away. It's 3 seasons, and then there was a movie they did afterwards, many years later, in fact, which kind of picked up where the TV show left off and brought closure to the stories. So I will watch the 3 seasons, and then right afterwards watch the movie, and so that will be that.
All right. I think my wife was talking about that the other day. So maybe both of you, just by coincidence, are off on the Deadwood train. So, and everybody's trying to find some different things. So I'm glad you've started that. Let me know how that goes. Mosse, this past week, I broke and violated my code. As you know, and those that listen and watch know, my hard and fast rule when it comes to television watching is I will not watch something until it is complete, in that the entire series is started and finished so that I can binge it from start to finish. I broke my rule. It was not intentional, because I thought that the new series on Apple TV, the Ted Lasso series, that for those that don't know, we talked a little bit about it last week. I thought that it was started and finished. I thought it was complete. I thought they were just dumping the whole thing on us and then you could binge it. And by the time I got going on it, then I realized that that was not the case. And so now they got me. Now they got me and I'm hooked. And I have to say, it's wonderful. I was worried. I was apprehensive, as to be expected from it's a soccer parody comedy. Jason Sudeikis reprises his what would have been a promo role for NBC, making fun of anything and everything when it comes on and off the field to the soccer game. I was worried that it was going to be laughing at us as opposed to with us when it came to American soccer people, and soccer in general. I can let you know that even 4 episodes in, it is not what I expected, and that is a good thing. It has a heart. It is an equal opportunity offender. It takes shots at anybody and everybody out there, so that insecurity is shared by everybody. But it's just very, very different than I thought it was going to be, and that's nice to see. But now I'm hooked, because it's not over, and now I got to wait for every new episode to come out. Like, what I had guarded against for so long has now taken a hold in me, and it's my own fault, and I hate myself for it. But I love that at least I found something that is very, very good.
One more thing you have to look forward to, I believe dropping next week on Amazon Prime, will be the Tottenham All or Nothing documentary chronicling this past Tottenham Hotspur season, which of course included the sacking of Mauricio Pochettino and the arrival of Jose Mourinho. And they've announced that one of my favorite actors, Tom Hardy, will be narrating the series. I'm hoping he does it in his Alfie Solomon's voice. That's a little Peaky Blinders reference. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that show, but so I am looking forward to that. I mean, they've really gotten lucky in some of the seasons they've chosen to depict. I mean, they choose that Leeds United season and you get all that craziness with Bielsa, with the Spygate. And here they choose Tottenham and you get the Pochettino sacking and Mourinho rivals. So this one should be very compelling as well.
Now that starts when?
I believe the date I've seen is August 31st. It's going to drop on Amazon Prime.
Soon here it's coming. All right, I'm in for that. I'd love to see that. Anything with the great one is going to be interesting at the very least. All right, enough about our viewing habits. We got plenty to talk about this week. So much happening on and off the field out there. Ready to light this candle, Mosse?
Yep.
All right, we're going to get right into it, and we're going to start out with the Champions League, the strangest and certainly longest Champions League season ever. It's gone into the 400-plus days. It's gone so long that actually the next season of Champions League has already begun, even though yesterday, as we record this on a Monday, the final of what I guess we're calling the 2019-2020 Champions League season is finished. Congratulations to Bayern Munich. For a lot of us, including you and I, Mosse, who have been working Bundesliga over the last few years and have seen what Bayern Munich is and at times what Bayern Munich isn't, this confirms a lot of our beliefs. And we talked a lot about this even back when we were doing the Bundesliga, back last fall, about what they can do and coaching changes, but obvious talent and individual talent. Hansi Flick deserves a tremendous amount of credit for coming in and doing the things and pressing the buttons in order to get this team on course. And you have to say, by the time they showed up yesterday on the field, this was as well an oiled machine when it comes to soccer as we have seen in a long time. I think even going into the game, I think that they were favored. I know that they were favored. I believed that they were a better team than PSG. I think that they were, as I said, a much more highly functional type of team individually and collectively, physically and mentally. I think that they were stronger than the opponent. And while it didn't necessarily show in the scoreline, this should not necessarily be a surprise to anyone that when all is said and done here, Bayern Munich are holding the trophy. Initial thoughts on the game and obviously on Bayern Munich being champions this year.
Bayern was the better team. Bayern is the better team. But I do think PSG will look back at this final with some real regrets. This was a very winnable game. They played about as well defensively as they could have hoped for. They did what they had to do on that end. And they created enough chances at the other end, particularly in the first half, that they'll feel like this definitely could have gone the other way. They needed their two big stars, Neymar and Mbappe, to deliver, and neither one of them did. They both had lousy games, and I think that's what ultimately cost them.
Yes. The Neymar thing, we should definitely get into that. We had been extolling his virtues after his recent performances and kind of being reminded or reintroduced for some people as to what an incredible talent he was. He had a couple opportunities, but a very quiet performance. And ultimately, I think it has to be said, a disappointing performance in what also has to be said is and was the biggest game in PSG history? Question mark? Not question mark. It's got to be. I mean, this was what this team was built to do. And I know it's an anomaly type of year and a very strange and challenging type of year, but still, they got to the summit. They got to what their goal has been. And in that big moment, I don't want to say Neymar let them down, but he didn't show up. And they weren't, and I said before that this is a highly functioning team. Bayern Munich, I got the feeling, it's not that they don't have stars. Absolutely, they have stars. But I got the feeling that they, more so than anybody out there, are able to distribute the responsibility in games in a way that others aren't. And PSG was much more about the individual and waiting for those individual magical moments. I mean, look, Robert Lewandowski didn't score in this final. And that in and of itself is strange. And yet everybody did their job. And there was always a feeling when you're watching Bayern Munich that somebody is going to figure it out. And that shared type of responsibility is ultimately, I guess, what the definition of a good team here is. When you look at this Bayern Munich team here, Mosse, and I know it's hard not to be, have the lens of 2020 informing a lot of it. How good are they in the pantheon out there of great teams?
Well, I think they end the season looking like one of the great teams in recent history. But, I talked about this a little bit last week, and it's worth revisiting. Bayern are a very smart club. There's no denying that. But there is this air of like, oh, everything is so well thought out with them. When in fact, I think the story here is how many of their original plans went haywire here and how many things didn't go according to plan, and their ability to adjust on the fly. Let's remember they sacked a manager this season in Niko Kovac after a 5-1 defeat to Frankfurt. They bring in Hansi Flick, and even after Hansi Flick took charge, they lost back-to-back Bundesliga games to Leverkusen and Gladbach in late November, early December. Through 14 rounds in the Bundesliga, they sat in 7th place. And at that point, heading into the winter break, the expectation from everybody was that Hansi Flick was just an interim guy, and of course they were going to bring in somebody else, maybe as early as the winter, Pochettino, somebody like that. Or, ironically enough, there was a lot of talk that they might keep Hansi Flick until the end of the season, only because they were waiting on Thomas Tuchel. He was their dream choice, and so they were going to have to wait for him until the end of the season and then convince him to leave PSG. And they didn't make Hansi Flick the permanent manager until April. And even on the field, I saw a lot of stuff the last couple of days about look at how much Bayern's 11 cost versus how much PSG's cost, the implication being that Bayern spend their money so efficiently. But, they did have an 80 million euro defender, their club record signing, Lucas Hernandez, sitting on the bench for this game, didn't get in at all. Benjamin Pavard, another big signing, got injured. And so Kimmich, who was supposed to be exclusively a midfielder this season, ended up starting their biggest games at right back. Alphonso Davies, who could have seen that coming, him moving to left back. Alaba moving to the center of defense. Jerome Boateng, a guy they've been looking to kick out the door the last couple of years, who was kind of a punchline on some of our Bundesliga shows early on this season. He ends up starting their biggest games. He, of course, gets injured in this one. And then Nicolas Sula, a guy who's been out for months, who's been injured all this time, and who would have been out for the season, by the way, if not for the pandemic. That gave him enough time to get back. He ends up having to come on. And so it was a lot of sort of adjusting on the fly. Even the Coutinho thing, we covered the Bundesliga, and early on this season, it was all about Coutinho, and Thomas Muller was on the bench, and Coutinho was going to be the difference maker, and then that ends up not working out, so Thomas Muller comes in and ends up having this incredible season, all these assists, and so a lot of this stuff was them sort of making it up on the fly and not really going according to the original plan.
Yeah, I mean, look, I want to be very, very clear. These are both very fancy and expensive machines. I'm just saying that, of the two, Bayern Munich is the more well-oiled machine. Now, you mentioned a couple things there, and I was thinking about this the other day. Had PSG won, or even in the current context with Bayern Munich winning, is there something missing? Is it diluted because of 2020? Are there those either publicly or maybe more, I guess, more privately, are saying, yeah, but, and this is that whole asterisk caveat type of situation for a lot of things that are happening in 2020. I guess the question is, had it been a normal Champions League, do you still think that Bayern Munich would have done this? In a certain way, did they benefit from the pandemic and because of this unique aspect of it? Or is this just as valid as any other?
I think Bayern winning it actually lends legitimacy to the Champions League title this season, because it is a team that we all were starting to think was the best team anyway and would have won it regardless. Had somebody come out of nowhere and won it under this scenario, we all would have looked at it and said, well, wait a minute, I think they just benefited from these unusual circumstances. But I think Bayern winning it, everybody comes out of this feeling like the right team won, and the team that there's a great chance would have won it under normal circumstances ended up winning it anyway. So I definitely think they sort of add some legitimacy to the whole thing.
And some of the crazy scenes, whether it was the watch party back in Paris, or please correct me if I'm wrong, the the celebration when PSG lost, even by the people in Lyon, or I don't know where they were,
Marseille.
but Marseille. Excuse me. It was something to behold.
Well, Marseille, they won the first edition of the Champions League 92-93. They beat AC Milan in the final in Munich, and they're the only French team to win it. And so even as PSG has become this monolith in the last decade and dominated domestically, that's still something they can hold over them, that we've won the Champions League and you haven't. And so that was a big topic the last few days. Marseille fans concerned that they were going to lose that. And so there was tremendous relief when Bayern won this game, and they're still able to hold that over PSG. But yeah, I mean, there's so many things to talk about with this game. We should hit, I mean, you've mentioned Robert Lewandowski. Mm-hmm. There's now this petition online to bring the Ballon d'Or back, because everybody feels like he's the guy that's the most victimized by them not handing out that award this year. And I agree. I think he'd be a shoo-in for it. He is probably going to win the FIFA Player of the Year award, so he'll have something from an individual standpoint to take out of this year. But it would be nice, because I on record as saying I thought it was a ridiculous decision to scrap the Ballon d'Or this year. I do hope they heed the calls to bring it back. And so Robert Lewandowski is able to be recognized in that way, because you agree he should win it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely, he should win it, and I do agree with you that it was ridiculous to get rid of it. I know this is a strange year, but I put value and I respect those teams or those individual players that have been able to be flexible, that have been able to adapt and adopt to this new normal. I think that in and of itself is of incredible value and should be celebrated and should be rewarded in the form of best players. Your ability to adjust. Some other things that jumped out on me. Manuel Neuer. There was a time not so long ago, a few years ago, when he got injured. Things weren't going well for him from a national team perspective, where we were saying that it's lost its luster, and that what was once the great goalkeeper of the world was no more. And yet he has come back, and look, he's always been a great goalkeeper, but he's come back. And once again, the way that Bayern Munich plays requires him, maybe only once a game, but at some point in a game, to make a big save, because they are vulnerable. And look, they put all their cards on the table, Bayern Munich. This is how we're going to play. We're not going to change. We know that we're vulnerable over the top. We know that there's going to be space. We also know that we have a goalkeeper who can make the traditional saves, can make the untraditional saves, and plays in a way that enables us to take that risk. But with that inherent risk comes those opportunities. And yet time and time again, he was up to the task. So I think he's back in the conversation as one of the greats in the world at this time. He certainly has been in the past at this time. And even more so in terms of his legacy, he fundamentally, over the years, has changed the way we think about that position. I'll get your comments in a second. Then I want to talk a little bit about Alphonso Davies and finish up this conversation when it comes to Bayern Munich. But Manuel Neuer, anything on that?
I agree with you. He is my favorite goalkeeper of all time. But
really, of all time?
Yeah, but I'm one of those people that's been denigrating him the last couple of years. In fact, I said very recently in this podcast that Ter Stegen had usurped him as Germany's best goalkeeper. And not the first time I look ridiculous for something I've said on this podcast, and it won't be the last. But yeah, Manuel Neuer made a mockery of those suggestions in the last couple of weeks. You're right. He was phenomenal. He was great in this final. The save on Neymar in the first half, the one on Marquinhos in the second half. Plaudits to him as well.
All right. So the what do they get for their efforts when you're a PSG? Well, you start the league season a week from now. So no rest for them. And obviously they took a break, unlike the other leagues out there, but they got to turn it back around. And then, the changes come almost immediately to sometime. People are talking about Thiago. I mean, theoretically, a player could leave Bayern Munich and next week play in the Charity Shields match or something like that. I mean, there's all sorts of craziness what's time anymore in 2020, right? It means nothing, but it also means some very strange things could happen, right, Mosse?
Yeah, I mean, you're reading stories today that Tuchel is under threat of being fired. But I just think the nature of this and the way one season is blending right into the next makes that very difficult. I think even if they're not crazy with him at PSG, you kind of have to live with him for another season. He did get to a Champions League final after all. And as you mentioned, they have a league game next week. The Champions League group stage starts up again in October, and it would just be very weird circumstances to bring in a new manager now. So I don't see that Tuchel change happening at all. Although I will say they have to sort out this Mauro Icardi issue, because this was a very weird situation. Icardi is somebody that Leonardo is very high on, and it was his decision to bring him on this season on loan with an option to buy permanently. Tuchel, you got the sense, wasn't that into it. And they ended up making the deal permanent for a lot of money. It's 50 million euros, but with bonuses that are going to take it to 60 million. While Tuchel, it seemed like, wanted them to re-sign Cavani instead. And the whole Icardi-Cavani dynamic was so mishandled this season that when the season ended, Cavani said, "The heck with it, I'm gone." He did not sign an extension so he could play in the Champions League like Thiago Silva did, which enabled Thiago Silva to play in these games. And boy, that proved costly, because they wouldn't have minded having somebody like Cavani to throw on in that game. And they did have Icardi on the bench, but he's slipped so far down Tuchel's pecking order that he brought on Choupo-Moting instead of Icardi. So now, spinning it ahead to next season, I don't know where that leaves Tuchel and Icardi. If in the biggest game of the season he's bringing on Choupo-Moting instead of a striker they just spent 60 million euros on, so it just shows they're not all on the same page there. The other guy, by the way, that PSG paid a heavy price for not being able to retain for these games is Thomas Meunier, who was their starting right back all season, a pretty good player. His contract ran out at the end of the normal season, and he went off and signed with Dortmund. And there's some conflicting stories there. He claims that PSG never approached him about signing an extension. PSG claimed they did, and he didn't want to. But they ended up having to start Thilo Carrera at right back, who's really more of a center back. And boy, his lack of technical ability really showed there. I mean, he gave them nothing attacking-wise down that right wing, really screwed up some good moves, and actually wasn't even that solid defensively in this game. I mean, Kingsley Coman ate him alive, and probably should have had a penalty late in the first half after he blew past him, and then Thilo Carrera lost Coman on the header. So Thilo Carrera to me was a real weak link in that PSG back line, and you keep thinking about, boy, their inability to convince Thomas Meunier to stick around for these games was.
Well, I suppose if you're looking at paying a price, Kingsley Coman, if you're PSG, if you're looking for paying a price over the years, given where he started.
That's where I was going to go next. Yeah, PSG have a sneaky good youth system, but of course they never use any of these guys because the model there is to buy, expensive players. And so these guys end up leaving and going elsewhere in search of playing time. And they came up against one of their youth products in the semifinals, and Christopher Nkunku, a player who had a terrific season with Leipzig, was one of the Bundesliga leaders in assists. So they could have gotten burned there. They didn't. They were able to shut down Nkunku and win that game. But they get burned here with Kingsley Coman. Moussa Dembele, another PSG youth product, scored 2 goals for Lyon in their win over Manchester City. Moussa Diaby, a pretty good player from PSG youth system, had a good season with Leverkusen. So you find these PSG youth products kind of scattered all over Europe because they're certainly not getting any playing time with PSG. And so that's what the path they end up having to take. And for a guy like Kingsley Coman, obviously it's worked out great. And yeah, there is some poetic justice here that he ends up scoring the winner in this final.
All right, well, let's finish it off here. Speaking of young players, although not from necessarily their youth system, Alfonso Davies. Congratulations to Alfonso Davies for being the first Canadian to win a Champions League at the ripe old age of 19 years old. We all know I don't know if we all know the incredible story, but he had Liberian parents that fled the country. He was born in a Ghanaian refugee camp, and then he and his family migrated to Canada, growing up in Edmonton, and only a few years ago was playing in the youth system for the Vancouver Whitecaps, then starred in MLS with the Whitecaps, and then over the last year, his life has forever changed because of what has happened at Bayern Munich. And when all is said and done here at the end, he is in rarefied air. And look, I hope he continues to go on and have success. I was watching Lewandowski, who at 33, 34, whatever age he is right now, gets his first Champions League trophy. And, here you got a 19-year-old that right out of the chute, everything has gone right. And when I was many, many years ago, I had a a conversation with John Harkes. And even though he's only a few years older than me, he still had much more experience. And he point blank told me when I first got to the national team, he said, you know what, if half of your years are successful as a soccer player, consider yourself lucky. And certainly don't take anything for granted. And I'm not saying that Alphonso Davies will, but this is some lofty heights at a very, very young age. And he's playing at a team that's going to continue to win. And he has established himself, as we said before, as the best left back in the world. And I only think he's going to get better because he's continuing to, even on the job, learn the position. That he's able to do that and still be considered the best left back in the world is a testament to how great a talent he actually is. And by the way, I know this is an aside, and I know this is something that just sticks in my craw. His name is Alfonso Davies. Okay. I refuse to believe that Brits cannot pronounce Alphonso Davies. Okay, it's not Davis, it's Davies. All right, all right. I digress. But congratulations to him. Just a wonderful year. I can't even imagine what's going on in his head and how much his life has changed and will continue to change because of this crazy path that he has taken and ultimately come out in, as I said, some rarefied air.
A couple of other miscellaneous things,
Sure.
and then I want to say something about Neymar. But congratulations to Sevilla. We don't give the Europa League a lot of love here,
Yep.
but that was a terrific final on Friday. They defeated Inter 3-2. They win their sixth UEFA Cup / Europa League title. Also, I read an interview in the last couple of days with UEFA president Alexander Ceferin, where he left the door open for this bubble scenario to come back at some point. He said he actually kind of liked it. There are all sorts of logistical issues with television networks having been promised a certain amount of games. And also, how do you fit this in the calendar? It's actually easier to fit scattered games as opposed to one big block of games that takes you a couple of weeks to play. But if they were able to get the logistics sorted, are you in favor of this scenario, or do you prefer going back to the old way, home and away, and home stadiums and such?
Look, I understand the economics of it. So just from a pure economic standpoint, I understand more games is more money and more TV viewers and all that. However, the one game scenario, and in this instance, are you saying that it would be a bubble scenario or just the higher seed teams hosts the one game?
The interview I read made it seem like a bubble scenario.
Okay. I mean, because that's a little different because it's a neutral type of situation. But regardless if it's a neutral situation or it's the actual higher seed hosting one game, I am still in favor of one game. I can recognize and appreciate at times the tactical decisions that are made and the philosophy relative to two games. And I do think that some teams are better equipped in a two-legged series than in a one-off game. But I just think to the extent that you can inject as much drama and importance and urgency in a game, you got to do it. And that's what we saw. I don't think it's going to happen, but I certainly would be in favor of it. Yeah. You?
I'm very intrigued by it. I have to say, I really like it.
Oh, look at you! You make yourself out to be such a traditionalist and an old school grumpy guy, and yet you're much more progressive than people feel. You're evolving, my friend.
And then last thing on Neymar, only because I don't want to be accused of ducking this. Yes, bitterly disappointed with his performance. Through the first 60, 65 minutes of the game, he didn't see a lot of the ball. I felt like in the first half, the few times he got it, he actually did some good things, but Bayern did a great job limiting his involvement. And then the really damning part was he became so frustrated that in the last part of that game, he checked out. And when his team needed him most, he just wasn't there mentally. A common criticism of Neymar in big games is that he develops this hero complex and tries to do too much and dribble past everybody. And I heard people trotting out that line yesterday. And to me, that's not what happened here. It was actually, he was oddly lackadaisical the last part of that game and was just giving the ball away with these lazy passes. His body language was awful. And so that is very damning, and he deserves to get criticized. And because it's Neymar, I know people like to twist the knife even a little bit further than they would somebody else. But I will say, to end it on a positive note, it was great to watch a healthy Neymar play games of consequence again, because injuries have robbed him of that the last couple of years. He's been sort of taken out of the mix, taken out of the picture. And I agree with what you said last week, and you reiterated that this week. He sort of reintroduced himself on the global stage again. And the last 2 weeks, he felt relevant for the first time in a while. And we were, again, talking about his play, and for good and bad. And I just hope that we've turned the corner on the whole injury thing, and there are no more wasted years in his career. And he's able to play in all of his team's biggest games for club and country, not miss any more international tournaments, not any more big Champions League knockout stage games. Because whether you like him or not, I just think this sport is more interesting with him in the mix.
Good. That's a good final point. I will only say this. If you are only great when you are playing on a better team than the opposition, then I'm not sure you're truly great. And, how many times have we seen Neymar, and look, he's played on some very great teams in his career, but how many times have we seen him on inferior competition raise the level? Look, when, I don't know, take your pick out of history. When Maradona played in Napoli, for example, okay? It wasn't that he was playing for the greatest team, and yet he starred and took that team on his shoulder, even for Argentina when he put it on his shoulder. And I think big players do that. Even Messi, at times we have talked about the Barcelona team not being as good as it has been in the past. And look, that's a pretty lofty hype, but still has the ability to do that. And I love Neymar, and I love that he was reintroduced to us. And I do think that he can be that great player. But like you say, I think whether it's a physical or a mental block that arises in these moments, I want that game where I say, you know what? Neymar was playing on an inferior team, and he took it upon himself in a way to make that team better in that instance. And I don't get the feeling that we're doing that a lot. And it's hard when you're playing on a super club, because those are rare occasions. But the other day, on Sunday, he was playing on an inferior team, and he wasn't able to impact the game in a way that he took it upon himself, took his team, and elevated that team. And that, for me, is what greatness is. All right, Mosse, anything else before we move on?
That's it.
All right, we're going to take a real quick break here. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about the U.S. men's national team path to the 22 World Cup. It's a little clearer than it has been in the past after some information came out this past week. Don't go away. Moving on. Okay, welcome back. Some news this week regarding the U.S. men's national team and their path back to the promised land of the World Cup, this World Cup being in 2022, the Men's World Cup. We now have a much clearer picture about what Concacaf qualifying is going to look like. And obviously, as things have changed through our pandemic, so has the qualifying process, so much so that it's completely different than it has been in the past. Not to get too bogged down in all the details, Mosse, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because there's a lot of stuff out there. But basically what we have right now is, from a U.S. perspective, the U.S. is going to sit and wait. And a lot of the CONCACAF minnows are going to fight it out in the form of, a first round, which would be 30 teams, 6 groups of 5, and then all 6 of the winners of those groups coming out, then fighting it out in the second round, and just a home and away type of series to be one of the top 3 of those 6. And then those 3 will join the 5 in that third round, which is where the U.S. is already waiting with the likes of Mexico, Costa Rica, Jamaica, and Honduras. The gist is that the U.S. is ultimately going to be in this group of 8, the octagonal, the octagon, whatever we're going to call it, formerly known as the Hex when it was a group of 6, which means that now instead of 10 games home and away, you're going to play 14 games home and away. The way that this shakes out is that obviously we know 5 or 4 of the opponents, being one of the 5 already in this third round. We're still waiting for those other 3, but the dates are set. And all of this will kick off from a U.S. perspective and for the rest of the teams, starting in June of 2021. So we got a long time. Greg Berhalter and company have a long time to wait before they actually are playing a World Cup qualifier. And with the way things are going right now, folks, I don't know when Greg Berhalter is actually going to be playing a game with the national team. Best laid plans and all. But the reality is that while it seems a long time, what it also means is by the time we get to June 2021 and qualifying starts, Greg Berhalter and this team will, I guess, have had very few, if any, opportunities to test themselves. So you might jump right into that qualifying process. The good news is that for the first 6 or so games, the U.S. should amass points with games against the likes of Jamaica, games against teams that will be coming up, so they will be inferior teams. And then it really gets, I guess, serious from a competitive standpoint in October of next year, 2021, when that first Clasico, the United States versus Mexico, happens. That will be played here in the U.S. We don't know where any of these games are going to be played, including the Classic of U.S.-Mexico. We know that for so many years it's been done in Columbus, but that's not assured of happening again in Columbus. All of this is to say that I still think, even with the 14-game format here right now, and maybe even more so because of the 14-game format, I still think the U.S. is going to qualify. I still think that 2017, the disaster that was 2017 qualifying for 2018, was an aberration. I do think that this team is better than it has been in the previous cycle, more talented, and I do think that they come with a chip on their shoulder and a recognition of the responsibility and, more importantly, the opportunity to set things right and to make up for past failures and to be that group that takes us back to where we belong. All right. Have I framed that correctly, Mosse? Have I missed out anything key?
No, you didn't leave anything out. Yes, you framed it correctly. And on the topic of setting things right, if you want to speculate here on who some of the opponents might be to fill in those blanks in the schedule,
yep.
The U.S. begins qualifying away to, right now it says Group A/F winner, and there is a very good chance that team will be Trinidad and Tobago, which you talk about some poetic justice, the U.S. beginning their next qualifying campaign away to TNT. And then that second game, right now it says versus Group B/E winner. My money is on that team being Canada, which would be very tasty second game as well, home to Canada. The other blank you'd have to fill is against Group C/D winner. My money would be on Panama being that team, although another option is a Curacao side now managed by our former Fox Sports colleague Gus Hiddink. So that would be fun if Gus Hiddink can somehow get Curacao to that.
I would love that. But look, but all these teams that you're mentioning are winnable, and 3 points. Home, away, it doesn't really matter. The U.S. should be able to get 3 points, which, to my point, the U.S. should, by the 7th game, when they do come up against, or even the 6th game versus Costa Rica, they should have amassed some good points and should have set themselves up to qualify as the more difficult opponents come into play. And look, it's not that you can't beat Costa Rica and Mexico. As a matter of fact, you can, and you should expect to, but there will be other easier opponents, and starting it off and getting a base of points, I think, is key for how this qualifying round is going to go.
Well, and if you look towards the end of the schedule, 2 of the last 3 games are away to Mexico and away to Costa Rica. So it would behoove the U.S. to be in good shape heading into that last stretch. You don't want to go to those games needing points, needing a win, because, I mean, those are places where wins have been very hard to come by over the years. So, yeah, the schedule is kind of set up in a way to gain a lot of points early to give yourself a margin for error, because it gets very tough late.
And you mentioned the likes of Curacao or Canada, or Panama. They're all going to have to take the long route. And as we've said time and time again, the 5 teams that were put into the third round and will wait for everybody to knock each other off, that was determined by Concacaf early on at a date, an earlier date, when it came to the rankings. And they took the top 5 and automatically placed them in there. Everything that happens in the pandemic era and certainly in 2020, as we've said time and time again, it's not about being fair. You try to be fair with the recognition that somebody is going to get a much more challenging type of pathway. So if someone like Canada ultimately does qualify for the World Cup, because keep in mind, while that final 8, the top 3 go, that 4th place finisher actually goes on and plays playoff games and then the intra-continental playoff. So we could still, from a Concacaf perspective, still have 4 teams going, but that is a real long way and a difficult way for a team to go. And there are those that will cry foul and say that this is unfair. And I can't disagree with them, but as we say time and time again, this is making the best of a crap situation and trying to do the best that you possibly can. CONCACAF came out very early on in the pandemic and said, look, our priority is to make sure that the leagues are functioning. And, to different extents, that is happening now. And so I think they could finally concentrate on getting some of these things done. But it's not easy. And these are just dates. And this is all just on paper. This could certainly change. To reiterate, next June, the U.S. will play, according to this, 4 in June, then 2 games in September, 2 games in October, 2 games in November. So by the end of 2021, they will have completed 8 games. 10 games of the 14 games in the octagon, if that's what we are calling it. And so we should have a good idea by the end of next year, if all goes as planned. That's a big if, about where the U.S. stands relative to qualifying for Qatar in 2022. And keep in mind, the World Cup in 2022 is not in the summer; it's in the fall, which gives everybody a little bit more of a cushion and more time to figure this all out.
Yeah, my macro view of this whole thing from the U.S. standpoint is, if you're a believer that the U.S. has this really impressive young talent, which I am, I love this nucleus of Pulisic, Reina, McKennie, Adams, Dest, et cetera. It's going to be interesting to see how these guys develop over the course of this qualifying campaign, because we all have sort of an idea of the quality of the U.S. team now, but come January of 2022, when they're away to Mexico, where will Gio Reyna be in his career then? Where will Christian Pulisic be? Where will Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie? They might have made a leap, and we could arrive at that game with feeling like the U.S., is now like loaded with, 2 or 3 like world-class stars, and we could be feeling very different about the team come early 2022 than what we do now in August of 20. So that is a long time in a player's development. So that's Berhalter, rightly so, keeps pointing out in every interview, we have a young team, but it might not feel like such a young team when you get to the home stretch of this qualifying campaign, depending on how well these guys develop.
And look, and there are anticipated challenges and problems along the way. And some, I know these are blackout dates, but we all know how players can be coerced. And I hope everybody, first off, I hope all the players recognize the opportunity and the responsibility that they have and want to get on a plane and fly to wherever it is. But in these days, they can be forgiven at times from having second thoughts. And certainly there's always the pressure when it comes to the clubs that they are at. And some of them are very, very big clubs, and some of them are vying for position. All of those different things come into play. And that's where guys like Ernie Stewart, guys like Brian McBride, and guys like Greg Berhalter, the coach, those relationships and maintaining those relationships with not just the players, but the clubs and the representation of these players, and making sure that those are healthy and that those are positive. So you have all guns blazing when these games come up. And once again, there's not going to be a lot of time for Greg Berhalter. And that's why I have this constant question to Greg Berhalter about if and how he has changed his philosophy from when it started because of the pandemic. And in normal circumstances, you have very little time. And now you have even less time with this team. And if he does get more pragmatic, because let's be honest, nobody cares how the U.S. qualifies for the next World Cup. They just care that we qualify. Nobody cares how we play in the next World Cup. They just care that we do well in the World Cup. Now, I'm not saying that how you play and style play and philosophy, all that kind of stuff isn't important. But when it comes to the national team and the World Cup, that's really all anybody cares. And even more so now when you can be forgiven by being more pragmatic because of the lack of time that you're going to have. Now, I'm not saying that that's what Greg Berhalter is going to do. He is and has been a true believer in what he started and maybe what he wants to finish. And come hell or high water, he is going to do that because he believes it's best for this national team, either for the moment or for that ramp way up to 2026. I don't know. But ultimately, Greg Berhalter is not going to be judged on how he plays. He's going to be judged on if he qualifies this team and then if he does well in a World Cup. And like I said, I am bullish about this team qualifying and doing well for a number of the reasons, including many of which you referenced there, the amount of players that are playing, where they are playing, how they are playing, not just internationally and in Europe and other places, but also the domestic talent that we have. I think Greg Berhalter, more so than any coach in history, is going to have at his disposal the most talented and experienced, evolved and mature group of American soccer players that's ever been assembled. And that's it. That doesn't mean that they win. It doesn't even necessarily mean that they play well, but I don't think that he can fault the pool that he has to choose from.
No, I agree. And last thing for me, I think the most interesting development in CONCACAF is the emergence of Canada. And I really hope they come out of these first two rounds and they're in this octagonal, because other than Mexico, those to me would be the most interesting games, home and away against Canada, Alphonso Davies and company. I think they've even overtaken Costa Rica in that regard as potentially that second juiciest opponent for the U.S. in CONCACAF. Do you agree?
I agree. And while the American in me wants to crush them, I want Canada. I've said this before. I want Canada to be more relevant when it comes to CONCACAF. I want Canada to be at a World Cup. I remember watching Canada in 1986 in the World Cup because my U.S. team had not been in my lifetime to a World Cup. And being proud of Canada simply because of our proximity. I lived in Michigan, and obviously we had a lot of Canadian connections, but still watching Canada, and that was the closest that I had ever seen an American team in a World Cup. And there was a pride, and I want them back, not at the expense of the US, but I want them to be part of that group. And I think it would help. You know, we're so connected now in North America and what we're doing in 2026 and Major League Soccer over the years that it would help not just Canadian soccer, but it would help North American soccer to have that. But we can't will it into existence. Although, you know, this is a good Canadian team. So best case scenarios, both the U.S. and Canada and Mexico, for that matter, qualify for the next World Cup. All right. Anything else on this latest scheduling stuff? And like we said, this is all subject to change, but this is the best case type of scenario, and hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, all that kind of stuff, this gets done. And by this time next year, all right, so we're in August of 2020. By this time next year, we will be approaching those September games. We will already have played 4 games. And then at the beginning of September, we will play a couple more. So 2021 is shaping up to be a jam-packed year because you'll have Gold Cup and potential Olympics and all sorts of things in there that will take plenty of our attention and give us plenty to talk about. Anything else, Mosse, from this perspective?
That's it.
All right, moving on. We're going to come back in a couple minutes here. We'll take a quick break. And when we get back, oh, yeah, it's Ask Alexi. You sent us in your questions, and Mosse's going to pick a few out and read them off. So don't go away. Moving on. All right, it's that time again. Time for Ask Alexi. Use that hashtag Ask Alexi, or you can send Ask Mosse. Just get it to us somehow on all the social media platforms out there and ask us questions or comments, hot takes, whatever you want. And we'll pick a few out each week as we have done this week. Mosse, what do the folks want to know or scream about this week?
First up, at Roma_0921 Peru. Boy, interesting.
Ooh, wow.
Have you seen enough to tell who can win the MLS Cup? Top 2, perhaps?
All right. So in what is already a crazy year, and, you know, we've already seen just this past weekend, the nuttiness that is MLS, inside or outside of the bubble for that matter. And you got a team like Orlando that everyone said was using the bubble to finally have their coming out party, and they were going to kick on, and immediately they go and they lose, not just lose, but lose to their interstate rivals in Miami, and give Miami their first ever win in franchise history. So the magic of the bubble didn't translate, at least in that game. Then you got El Trafico, and you got the Los Angeles Galaxy, who also hadn't won a game in 2020, going into LAFC, arguably the best team in Major League Soccer, and not only winning, but winning comfortably 2-0. So everything is topsy-turvy. Everything is up and down when it comes to MLS. Right now, if you just look at it from a pure standings perspective, you got the Columbus Crew in the Eastern Conference leading. Right behind them is Toronto FC. If you look at the Western Conference, you got Sporting KC at the top of the Western Conference, with Seattle Sounders after they got that win last night in Portland against Portland. By the way, Portland, the winners of MLS's back bubble tournament down there. So another topsy-turvy type of result. Of those two teams, look, I think Columbus right now really understands what they are. And I think are very, very confident. And I think they're very also excited about, off the field with what's going on with the Crew, with the new stadium, with new ownership, all that kind of stuff. I think that buoys their spirits, and then you combine it with a very, very good team and a smart and, as I said, very organized type of approach to what they are and what they aren't. So I could definitely see Columbus Crew cruising through and winning MLS Cup. Toronto FC, the whole Canadian thing right now, with they're only able to play against Canadian teams, it's a very strange situation, but Toronto, it doesn't matter who they're playing against. With the experience that they have, absolutely. Atlanta United, that we always talk about, look, Pity Martinez looked like a reborn player in their 2-0 dismantling of Nashville and his two goals. Is it because the coach was fired in Frank de Boer? I don't know. They're always going to be around. Okay, so then we go to the Western Conference. Sporting, I'm not buying. Seattle, I am, just because I think of their history and of their quality. I'm not buying the Loons up there in Minnesota. I love them, but I'm not buying them. And then LAFC, I mean, they're sitting in 5th place right now, but if they get Carlos Vela back, and he was rusty, and Diego Rossi was not good either, and Carlos Vela left the game with an injury, yeah, they can. I'm not going to say they're going to win it, because I think they are the type of team that does incredible things, and then in that moment something goes wrong. I don't know how you get over that hump, but they're still going to be one of the big teams. So look, if you wanted the two teams, I would say I'd actually say both of them from the East Coast, the Eastern Conference, in Columbus and Toronto. So there's your answer. Mosse, anything stick out to you when it comes to the craziness of MLS over the
yeah, you kind of hit on a lot of my points. I'm high on Columbus too. What a goal by Darlington Nagbe! Huh?
Oh my God!
In that win over Chicago. And what a big win for Guillermo Barros Schelotto. Hats off to him. He had a really nice game plan. They really disrupted LAFC's rhythm and didn't let him play as easily as they did in the MLS's back tournament. And then he created a platform there for Pavon to really shine. I thought he was terrific. Araujo was very good in that game too, with 2 assists. That the back line held up pretty well. They get Jonathan Dos Santos back on the field. So some of those dark clouds lifted a little bit for the Galaxy, and all of a sudden you could see the makings of a decent team there.
They celebrated in a way that showed that it's not, the pressure isn't off, but it was alleviated a little. I mean, look, Guillermo Barros Schelotto, if they had gone in there and gotten hammered, it would not have surprised me if he was gone. This is a team, as you said, that has not been good this year. They were good. They deserved it. To a man, they were better. This opinion that the heat was responsible for it. Yeah, it was hot. And yeah, it was a mid-afternoon game, but it certainly didn't bother the Los Angeles Galaxy. They had no problem. And afterwards, they celebrated. They might have celebrated a bit too much, slow your roll and all that kind of stuff. But you could tell that this was something that was important to them, and that they had felt the pressure and the critique and criticism that was coming for what has been oftentimes called, including I've called them a very mediocre team, but they were anything but mediocre against LAFC the other day.
And one team actually you didn't hit on that we should discuss is NYCFC. They lose to the Red Bulls. We focus so much on Atlanta and the Galaxy's woes this season, but that's a club very much in crisis. Ronnie Dela off to a rough start there. What do you make of that situation?
I can't explain it. I cannot explain it. It's not for lack of talent. It's not for lack of identity. It's just I wish I could explain it. I thought that they were going to be, I thought that they were going to be more successful. Did I think that they were going to be better? Yes. But I don't know. I wish I could put my finger on it. And maybe it's just this crazy year. But once again, you got to be able to adjust and you got to be able to adapt. Now, look, I think that there are some more twists and turns that are coming when it comes to Major League Soccer and this return to play in the regular season in markets. And look, even in normal times, Major League Soccer is incredibly difficult to predict. And its unpredictability is something that endears me to it. I love the fact that it is topsy-turvy and there's so much that can go on. And, if I ever find that person that is able to accurately and consistently predict MLS, I'll win a lot of money. All right, Mosse, what else?
At SEC103J, thoughts on Rose Lavelle heading to Manchester City and what it means for NWSL and the U.S. women's national team when top American women's players go overseas. Sam Ewis also made a similar jump going to Manchester City recently.
Yeah, so first off, a couple of things that should be noted here. Okay, so we're in 2020. We had the NWSL bubble that happened. They are still, by all accounts, trying to figure out some sort of continuation of play in 2020, but nothing has been formally announced, and who knows if it will be. I think it's important to understand that in 2020, the U.S. women's players that are signed with the United States Soccer Federation continue to be paid, even though they are not playing. They are being paid their salary as U.S. women's national team players, and they are being paid their salary and guaranteed to be paid these salaries for their NWSL participation, even if they opt out and choose not to participate. Okay. And this is because of, ironically, the contract that they agreed to and the CBA that they agreed to. And it guarantees them this. It affords them this type of security. Part of that CBA is a recognition when it was first signed that you wanted to assure that players were going to stay. And so there was a limit as to the number of players that could be allowed to play outside, which is 3. Now, 2020 is obviously a very strange year. And I think from a U.S. and why I'm talking about the USSF is because that's who is paying most of these players. If you're a player in the NWSL and you want to go overseas and you're just a regular NWSL player that's being paid by the league, that's fine. And we'll talk about that in a second. But we're talking about these players that are under contract with USSF, the United States Soccer Federation, who is also paying their NWSL salaries. And they're all getting paid, even though they're not playing, whether they're not playing NWSL or they're not playing and they're certainly not playing with the U.S. national team. So 3 players are allowed. But in 2020, you want your players playing. And the reality is, in 2020, especially in the United States, it's very difficult. And if you're a professional, you want to play. And you want to get to a place to your place. So I think there will be a recognition from USSF that they will allow players to go and do that. For a number of players, it's going to be with the recognition that this is a temporary type of fix and that they will return and that they will be back. Now, is this a bad thing in the bigger picture for NWSL? I think it's a challenge, and I think it is worthy of their attention. But I think what it can do and what it should do is reinforce the fact that they better protect themselves. And when I say protect themselves, recognize that the rest of the world is catching up. The rest of the world already has existing infrastructure when it comes to opportunities and affiliations with some very, very big clubs. So it is very turnkey. So when you go to Manchester United, you go to Man City, or you go places in France and other places, you're stepping into an already established system and an already established resources. You got to be able to compete. And if you're NWSL and you want to call yourself the best league in the world, you better be able to compete from a financial perspective, from a resource perspective, from a prestige perspective. And this hopefully will continue to remind NWSL and light a fire to be able to be competitive. And this is the market that you live in. And so I don't think that this is a bad thing. As a matter of fact, I think it's a necessary thing, and something that I think will drive what NWSL is going to do from a business perspective and a future perspective, to make sure that they are creating a league that can compete on and off the field and provides opportunities for their players where they want to be here and they don't have to go overseas. And whether it's the actual money that they are making or the facilities that they are exposed to, or just the love that they are getting from these markets. So all of that is to say that while it can be seen as an exodus and therefore a problem, I think a lot of it is just the times that we are living in. And I think if all things are equal, and they're not always equal, but if they are all equal, I think more often than not, American women's players, whether they're with the national team or not, are going to opt for the opportunity to play at home. But you got to make it competitive, and you got to be able to pay them. And the grass isn't always greener over there, but at times it can be pretty green, and if only for the experience. So it's a good question. I would not be running around saying the sky is falling, but this should be a reminder to NWSL that you better have your ducks in order, and you better be able to compete, and you better step up when it comes to ownership, because Europe continues to come, and they will continue to look at the talent that we have, whether it's domestic American talent or just talent that is playing in the NWSL that might be international, to pick those off. And you can very easily lose that, that distance that you have created over the years, and very quickly lose that distance. All right, what else?
Well, very quickly on the topic of European women's soccer, we should mention the Women's Champions League is taking place right now. We're in the semifinal stage. We're taping this on a Monday. Tuesday, the day this podcast drops, Wolfsburg, Barcelona. And then Wednesday, an all-French semifinal, PSG, Lyon. Remember, in women's soccer, Lyon are the big powerhouse. They've won this competition the last 4 seasons. They're going for 5 in a row. And then the final is Sunday, August 30th.
Okay. All right.
And lastly, at emonzone14, this was a question you requested of Alex Dowd on the rundown. Will the MLS squad versus Euro squad for the U.S. men's national team cause confusion? I must confess, I'm a little confused by the question. What exactly is this?
What I think he's saying, and the reason why I wanted to talk about it, is that, over the years, the groups, or the separation and the sides of players that are playing domestically, for the most part in Major League Soccer, almost entirely in Major League Soccer, and then players that are playing overseas, and for the most part over in Europe at some very, very big clubs. And these two camps have to come together. And dynamics of a team are so important. And I can remember, because I've been on both sides of it. I have returned to the national team from playing, at the time I was playing in Italy, and I've returned to the national team at a time when I was playing in Major League Soccer. And, I talk a lot about the insecurity that we have, and we have had, and we continue to have. And there's nothing we can do about it except own it and recognize it. But I vividly remember at one point, when I had come back to the national team, and I was playing in Major League Soccer at the time. And I remember having a shouting match at one point with Steve Sampson because of the way that he had been talking about the domestic players versus the, let's call them, for lack of a better word, the international players. And I thought that it was condescending. and I let him know. Now, once again, that was maybe my insecurity and my sensitivity to this, but you have to find a way to have a player that is playing in Europe, and the way that affects you, thinking that it's not thinking that your you know what doesn't stink. It's that you're playing over in Europe and everybody is telling you that this is a higher level and that you have done something special, and therefore you equate that with being better, and therefore you should be seen as such. Trying to get over that, and at times that condescending type of inferior look that you get from playing in Major League Soccer. So, for example, and I'm not saying that this happens, but you got a Jordan Morris up there in Seattle. He comes into the national team. He spent his entire career in MLS. And you have, I don't know, a Weston McKennie who has never played in MLS and has played in the Bundesliga. Who knows, potentially could be at the EPL this year, whatever. They come into the national team. And I'm just using them as examples. I'm not saying that this happens. But the way that they act, the way that they behave, the way that they interact can have a dramatic effect on how you actually play and how that camp goes. And if there is any type of perceived condescension from either way, a resentment one way or the other, that can manifest on the field. And so you got to be able to nip that in the bud immediately. You got to be able to suss it out and recognize it. And I think ultimately it comes from the top. And that's why I mentioned that Steve Sampson story. It was just a one-time thing. But I wanted to make sure that he understood that the way that he interacted with the players and the different groups mattered. And we were listening to the words that he used and the way that he talked. And as I said, I hold up my hand and say maybe we were overly sensitive, or maybe I was overly sensitive to it. But I think it starts from the top. And I think you got a guy in Greg Berhalter who has had incredible experience, and I think will recognize that the things that he says and how he treats the players and those groups that inevitably are going to form are key. Because if you got a player coming in from Europe, as I said, that just thinks that, I live in a totally different world and you guys don't understand what it means to be a true pro and play in a soccer culture, that is a recipe for disaster. And in the same way that if you have a player who's playing domestically in MLS comes in and resents these other players or is constantly having a negative reaction to those other players, that can be problematic. That can be problematic too. So I know that's a long way of saying it, but that's what I was thinking when he was asking this question. So that dynamic is so key right now because of these two groups that we have to meld together. That in and of itself is what is going to make this team successful. Because as much as we talk about the Gio Reynas and the Tyler Adams and Christian Pulisic and Weston McKennies and others that are out there that are going to populate this team, it's not all going to be from players playing in Europe. You're going to need those players from MLS. And if there is this headbutting, if there is this dynamic where there's not a mutual respect between those two groups, as I said, that can lead to real problems down the line. And you got to be able to recognize it, as I say, and deal with it initially. And that's why I wanted to include that, because I think it's a conversation worth having, and I think it's only going to become more important for Greg Berhalter or whoever is the coach of that national team going through. Anything else, Mosse?
Oh, let me just say, I'm guilty sometimes of when I talk about what a bright future the U.S. has, only rattling off the European-based players of Pulisic, Arenas, McKennie, Adam Dest, et cetera, and leaving Jordan Morris out. And Jordan Morris absolutely belongs in that conversation. I mean, he goes up, in my estimation, every time I watch him. In fact, I forgot to mention this during the MLS discussion, but he had a play in the first half of that Portland-Seattle game where I think it was Lodero chipped it to him in the box, and he did this absolutely lovely flick to Rui Diaz. I don't know if you remember the play I'm talking about, which if that's like Gio Reyna in a European game, like the Twitter would have exploded. People's heads would have exploded, but it got kind of lost because, I don't know, it's an MLS game, so who cares? But I'm sorry, that was an incredible display of skill from a player who, like I said, every time I watch him now, he shows me that there's more in his locker than I realize, and he does things that I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't realize he had that enough skill to kind of do that in that situation, and just his soccer IQ. So he really is a terrific player.
And look, if he never plays a game over for a European club and stays his entire career in Major League Soccer, or stays his entire career for Seattle, he hasn't let anybody down. He certainly hasn't let himself down. All right. He hasn't unfulfilled some sort of destiny that American soccer folks believe that is his responsibility to fill. And he could be a star in a World Cup, as much so as a Christian Pulisic or anybody else. But if he comes into camp and he feels that group is looking down on him or treating him differently, and once again, I'm not saying any of this is happening, but that's what you have to guard against. And this inner tribalism, basically, that can be the death of a team. All right, Mosse, anything else when it comes to Ask Alexi?
No, nothing on Ask Alexi, but my last thing on this podcast is I've just received a text from a buddy letting me know that Thiago Silva is headed to Chelsea on a 2-year deal. If, Alex Dowd still was willing to participate in this podcast, I'd be curious to get his thoughts on that. But, it's been a roller coaster ride for me and him because Willian has left. So I thought we'd have nothing to bond over anymore. But now Thiago Silva coming in, we have that. So, but
Chelsea's looking good. I mean, God, the signings that they are having. I mean, it's, at least on paper, it's going to be fun to watch, and it's right around the corner. I mean, it is starting. A couple weeks? I mean, it's amazing what 2020 is, and I guess that's a good way to lead in. You got anything else, Mosse?
No, that's it.
All right, Mosse. Well, we know that Alex Dowd is not going to grace us with his presence. We really got to, kind of pull him out of his shell, and that's our challenge for the future. But look, these leagues are coming fast and furious. There is no rest for anybody. Basically, 2020 is nuts. But one thing that we do know is consistent is the Ask Alexi segment. So thank you for everybody for sending us those questions. Keep them coming. Use that hashtag Ask Alexi out there on all the social media platforms, and we will pick them each and every week. And they keep getting better and better and better. And thank you so much for those. All right, we're going to take one more break here. And when we come back, I'm going to give you my one for the road. Don't go away. Moving on. All right, we're back. And at the end of each and every podcast, as you know, I give you my one for the road. And we were talking about how the leagues are going to be coming back before we know it. And some are already back. And for those of you that are out there that have kids like I do, speaking of coming back, school is upon us. It may already have started for you out there. For me, it starts here within the next week. And what normally is a time of great excitement and anticipation certainly it has been changed. And my thoughts and my heart and my prayers to a certain extent go out to everybody out there that is about to embark on this latest form of education. If you are like me and the vast majority out there, you are about to embark again on a semester ahead of us of online type of learning and Zoom calls and a very, very different and strange type of schooling. Look, there's nothing we can do about it. I tell my kids all the time, I wish that I could tell you when this is going to end. I can't. I wish that I could tell you about an experience that I had in the past and what I learned from it that is relatable when it comes to what we're going through now, and I can't. And so we're all going to have to muddle through this together. And so I wish you all well. There are some kids that listen to this pod. If you are embarking on this, recognize that everybody is doing this together. And I know it sucks. And I do hope that sooner rather than later, we will be through this. You will all, as a generation, have an incredible story to tell, as I've said time and time again. And your ability to make the best of it is going to dictate some of your future success. And so there is that opportunity. And I was talking a few weeks ago about some of the Zoom calls that I've had with teams and with players out there. And it applies to everybody. This is, in a strange way, but in a very real way, Yeah, this opportunity, and it requires flexibility. I've talked a lot about that on this podcast, flexibility and the ability to adapt and to adopt to a whole new normal. And you might not like it. As a matter of fact, very few of us would like it, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't present an opportunity, and an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to learn things that we haven't learned before, and an opportunity to emerge maybe better. And so whether it's kicking a ball because you have the time and you have the opportunity to work just on your left foot, or whether it's bearing down when it comes to school in this type of form in a way that you haven't been able to do in the past, we're all going to emerge from this, and we will all have hopefully grown, and in certain ways maybe even become better. But it also doesn't mean that we don't have our moments of downtime and being down, and it's okay, because, you know, as I've said before, this is unlike anything that any of us have ever experienced before. So to all the kids out there, have as good as a fall 2020 semester as you can have. I wish you luck. Be creative, be yourself, and still try to do the work. And I know it's not easy. I know it's difficult. And to all the parents, where this type of a new normal is providing challenges that we never thought that we would have, and some very, very real challenges when it comes to schooling and parenting and being a family in this type of environment. I wish you well. And if I had the answers, I would give them to you. As I said before, we're just going to all muddle through this together. Mosse, you don't have to worry about that yet. And hopefully by the time that you do, we will be long past this. But hopefully we will have learned something. But you got a whole lot of kids that are going back to school. You got a whole lot of soccer players that are going back to school, unfortunately, without that component of soccer. I know there's a little bit of soccer being played from a youth perspective out there, but certainly nothing the likes of which we consider normal. And hopefully this is as temporary as it has to be in order to get us out there, and that we are back not only kicking the ball, but we are also back out there going to school in a normal sense and having those type of relationships and human interaction that makes school so important, and such an important part of childhood and a part of life. Anything else, Mosse, before we head out?
No, I hope to have kids going off to school, but I have to get a date first, so one step at a time.
All right. Well, look, will you settle in this day and age for a Zoom date? Is that okay? How's your Zoom game when it comes to interacting with?
You tell me. You interact with me on Zoom more than any other human being.
Listen, there is somebody out there that would be incredibly lucky to have a David Mosse in their life. I am incredibly lucky. We are incredibly lucky to have a David Mosse in our life. We're also incredibly lucky to have everybody that listens to this pod. Thank you so much for each and every week tuning in and listening and watching, and downloading and subscribing and rating and doing those things on all the different platforms out there, wherever you do get your podcasts. It means a tremendous amount to us, and we're going to continue to do so. So anything else, Mosse? You good?
That's it.
All right. We will see you again and talk to you again next week on the State of the Union podcast. But until then, size the day.
You like that clip? Well, my State of the Union podcast drops every week. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.